He never heard the front door close. That was the thing about Senna. She never slammed anything. She folded her silence into sharp, precise corners and left it where it would cut the deepest. While Hadion Morova sat in the amber glow of his private dining room, choosing diamond rings for a woman who wasn't his wife, Seni walked out of the lakeside estate carrying nothing but a leather overnight bag and 8 years of his empire in her head. By the time he realized she was gone, 3 of his offshore accounts had been frozen. His longest-standing distributor couldn't move $1, and the woman sitting across from him, the one he had called his future, couldn't even tell him the name of his accountant. 48 hours earlier, the estate smelled of cedarwood and freshly cut gardenias. Halion stood at the head of the long mahogany table in the formal dining room, adjusting the cufflinks on his midnight blue dress shirt. They were platinum, engraved with the Morova family crest, a coiled serpent eating its own shadow. A gift from his father, passed down the morning of the old man's funeral, along with 12 shipping routes, a private armory beneath a vineyard in the eastern hills, and the unspoken understanding that sentimentality was a luxury the family couldn't afford. The chandelier above him threw fractured light across the table settings. 12 place settings of hand-painted porcelain, crystal glasses that rang when you breathed too close to them. A centerpiece of white orchids, so perfect they looked artificial, though Sen insisted on real flowers. She insisted on a lot of things quietly, in ways that didn't register until they were already done. The voice came from the opposite end of the table. Fauve Renard was sitting in Senna's chair. She did that often now. Small, territorial encroachments, disguised as casual choices. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, her dark auburn hair spilling across the collar of a silk blouse that cost more than most people's rent. She held her phone loosely, her manicured nails tapping against the case. She was beautiful, in the way an expensive painting was beautiful, stunning under the right lighting, but ultimately decorative. The jeweler? Halion asked, not looking up. Alençons. They're sending the final selection to the house. 3 settings, all princess cut. She'll need to be sized, she, not Sene, the other she. The arrangement Halion had been engineering for 4 months. A new public companion for the galas, the fundraisers, the carefully choreographed social front that kept the law and the media looking in the wrong direction. Fauve was the replacement, not officially, not yet. Hadion hadn't filed any papers. He hadn't spoken the word divorce out loud because saying it would mean admitting his marriage had a beginning and would therefore need an end. Instead, he had simply started living as though Sen were already fading from the frame. And Sen? Halion asked, straightening a fork that was already perfectly aligned. Fauve shrugged. A gesture so practiced, it looked choreographed. What about her? She's upstairs. I think she was doing something with the accounts when I came down. Doing something with the accounts. Halion almost smiled. Sen was always doing something with the accounts. She had an unsettling, almost frightening intimacy with numbers. She could look at a spreadsheet the way a surgeon looked at an X-ray, seeing the fractures no one else could find, diagnosing the hemorrhages before they bled out into the open. He had married her 8 years ago. It wasn't a love match. It was geographic. Her father controlled the northern corridor, a stretch of freezing, desolate highway between the mountain ports and the capital that every smuggler in the region needed access to. The marriage merged the routes. Sene came with the territory, literally. A quiet, sharp-boned woman with steady hands and an unreadable face who had sat across from him at their wedding reception and asked, before the cake was cut, whether he preferred his financial summaries weekly or bi-weekly. He had laughed. She hadn't. Within 6 months, she had restructured his entire accounting pipeline, identified a $250,000 leak in the harbor payroll, and fired 3 men who had been skimming fuel subsidies for a decade. She did it without raising her voice, without carrying a weapon, and without once asking for his permission. Halion respected her, the way you respect a well-built lock on a vault door, essential, easy to forget, was there until someone tried to break in. But he didn't look at her the way he looked at Fauve. He didn't think about her when he left her room. She was the architecture of his life, not the view from the window. And that, Senna had decided 48 hours before she disappeared, was no longer enough. Halian found her in the study on the second floor. Though found was generous, she was always in the study. It was a narrow, wood-paneled room, lined with leather-bound books nobody had ever read, and filing cabinets that held the real literature of the Morova Empire, shipping manifests, customs briefs, and payroll records from men whose job titles didn't exist on paper. Seni sat behind the desk, her dark hair pulled back with a simple silver clip. She wore a gray cashmere sweater, with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and no jewelry except her wedding band, which she turned absently on her finger as she read. The lamplight carved deep shadows under her cheekbones. She had lost weight recently. Halion hadn't noticed. "The Veraldi shipment is flagged," she said without looking up. Her voice was calm, measured, the same tone she used for everything. Profit reports, death threats, grocery lists. Customs in Brennerfeld pulled 2 containers for inspection. I rerouted the third through the castle corridor, but it added 9 hours and an additional fee to Polzen's crew. "Handle it," Halion said, leaning against the doorframe. He was already half-turned toward the hallway, his mind on the dinner reservation he'd made for Fauve at the private club on the waterfront. "I did handle it. I'm telling you so you're aware." He glanced at her. Something in her voice, a hairline fracture in the usual granite composure, made him pause. She was still looking at the screen, but her fingers had stopped moving over the keyboard. Her wedding band caught the lamplight. "Is there something else?" he asked. Sen was quiet for 3 seconds. In her world, 3 seconds was a century. She was the fastest mind he had ever encountered. A woman who processed information the way other people processed oxygen, constantly, unconsciously, without effort. "Fauve is sitting in my chair," Senna said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement delivered with the same flat precision she used to report quarterly losses. But beneath it, buried so deep, that Hadian would only recognize it much later, when he was replaying this moment in the wreckage of everything that followed, was something he had never heard from her before: finality. "She needed somewhere to sit," Halion said. "Don't read into the furniture, Senna." She looked at him then. Her dark eyes held his for a long, unblinking beat. He saw nothing alarming in them because he wasn't looking for anything alarming. He saw his wife, his accountant, his architecture. "Of course," she said softly, turning back to the screen. "It's just a chair." Halion left the study. He didn't notice that her overnight bag was already packed and sitting behind the filing cabinet, hidden in the shadow where the lamplight couldn't reach. He didn't notice that the external hard drive usually plugged into the side of her laptop was missing. And he didn't notice that when she turned her wedding band that final time, she slid it off her finger entirely and placed it gently in the top drawer of the desk. She closed the drawer without a sound. The first sign came at 6:47 the next morning. Halion was in the kitchen, standing barefoot on the heated marble floor, pouring coffee from the French press when his personal phone began vibrating against the countertop. Not the burner. Not the encrypted line reserved for operations. His personal phone. The one only 5 people in the world had the number to. It was Brennan, his head of distribution for the Western ports. "Morova, we have a problem." Brennan's voice was tight, stripped of its usual gruff confidence. "The Polzen account just bounced a wire transfer, 80,000. The routing number is dead. I called the intermediary bank in Liechtenstein. They say the signatory authorization has been revoked." Hadian set the coffee pot down. "Revoked by whom?" "They won't say." "But the secondary account, the one we use for the castle cruise, that's frozen too." "I can't move money, Hadian. I'm standing in a warehouse with 14 men expecting to be paid and no way to pay them." Halian's chest tightened. He walked out of the kitchen, his bare feet silent against the stone hallway. He took the stairs two at a time, moving toward the second-floor study. The door was open. The desk lamp was still on, casting a pale yellow cone across the leather surface. Senna's laptop was gone. The chair was pushed in neatly, perfectly square against the desk. He pulled open the top drawer, the one where Sen kept her personal effects, the one he never had reason to open. The encryption keys for the offshore routing channels, usually stored in the filing cabinet beside it, had been removed. The hanging tabs were still in place, each label still visible. Only the contents were gone. But it wasn't the missing files that stopped him. Sitting centered on the bare wood of the drawer, placed with deliberate precision, was her wedding band. Hallian picked up the ring. It was still warm, which was impossible. She must have left it hours ago. But his hand was cold, and the metal felt alive against his skin. Like a small, quiet accusation, he pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It rang once, then cut to a recorded message. The voicemail box was full. He tried again. Same result. He called the estate's head of security. "Kosar, where's my wife?" A pause. The sound of paper shuffling. Mrs. Morova left the estate at approximately 2:15 a.m. "Sir, on foot." She declined the car service. She was carrying a single bag. On foot? And nobody stopped her. "She's your wife, sir, not a prisoner." She told the gate detail she was going to the pharmacy. "At 2 in the morning. Sir, find her." Hallian's voice dropped into the register that ended conversations. "Pull her phone location. Check the cameras on the lake road. I want her route in 10 minutes. He hung up and stood in the empty study, the wedding band pressing a cold circle into his palm. Behind him in the hallway, Fauve's voice drifted from the bedroom, sleepy and unconcerned. "Hallian, come back to bed. It's not even 7. He didn't answer. Something had shifted beneath his feet, a structural crack in the foundation of his entire operation, and for the first time in years, Hallian Morova couldn't see where the damage ended. Kosar's team tracked her phone signal to a dead zone, a commercial block near the old garment district, 14 miles from the estate. The signal had gone dark at 3:08 a.m. and never reappeared. Either the phone was destroyed or it was sitting inside a Faraday cage. Neither option was accidental. Sene didn't do anything accidentally. Hallian drove himself. He didn't take the armored sedan. He didn't bring Kosar or any of the perimeter detail. He pulled on a dark coat, laced his boots in silence, and took the keys to the gray Audi that Sene used for errands. The car that still smelled faintly of her, something clean and unadorned, like pressed linen and cold air. The morning was overcast. A heavy, iron-colored sky pressed down on the city, turning every surface flat and dull. The estate's manicured grounds, the sculpted hedgerows and white gravel paths, gave way to the main road, then the bypass, then the slow grinding decline into the eastern industrial quarter. Hallian had never driven this route before. He had never needed to. His world existed in a 6-mile radius of the lakeside estate, the private club, the harbor offices, the vineyard where the armory slept beneath 40-year-old Merlot vines. Everything beyond that perimeter was managed, delegated, handled by people whose names appeared on payrolls Sene maintained. The garment district was a skeleton of the city's older economy. Long, low-slung brick buildings, with painted signage fading into ghosts, metal security shutters rolled down over storefronts that hadn't opened in years, a laundromat with a blinking fluorescent sign, a shuttered butcher shop with brown paper, still taped over the windows. Hallian parked the Audi outside a narrow 4-story building, wedged between a print shop and a boarded-up textile warehouse. The address had come from Kosar's secondary sweep, not Sene's phone, which was dead, but her encrypted transit pass, which had logged a tap at the metro station 2 blocks south. Cross-referencing that with a utility account Kosar had dug out of a buried corporate filing, they found it. A 1-bedroom apartment, leased 18 months ago under a shell entity Sen had created using a corporate structure Hallian didn't even know existed. 18 months. She had maintained a separate life for 18 months, and he hadn't noticed. The building's entrance was clean but sparse. No doorman, no security desk. Just a narrow corridor with a tiled floor that smelled of bleach and radiator steam. A row of brass mailboxes lined the wall, each with a small handwritten label. Unit 4C had no name, just an initial. M. Morova. Hallian climbed the stairs. The stairwell was narrow, the walls painted, a flat institutional white. The railing a simple iron bar bolted into the plaster. His boots echoed in the confined space. On the third-floor landing, a window looked out over a gray courtyard, where a single bare tree stood in a square of cracked concrete. It was the most desolate thing he had ever seen, and his wife had been looking at it for a year and a half. He reached the fourth floor. The door to 4C was unremarkable. Solid wood, brass knob, a simple deadbolt. He tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back, drove his shoulder into the frame, and the cheap bolt gave on the second impact, the wood splintering cleanly around the strike plate. The door swung open. The air inside was still cool and carried a scent that hit him harder than he was prepared for. It smelled like Sen, not her perfume, which she wore at the estate for events and dinners, but the real scent beneath the performance. Clean cotton. Black tea. The faint mineral tang of ink from a printer that had been running recently. She wasn't there, but everything she had been doing for the past 18 months was. The apartment was small. One room that served as both living space and office, a narrow kitchen alcove and a bathroom, with the door standing half open. There was a single window facing the courtyard, covered with a sheer linen curtain that filtered the gray morning light into something soft and almost gentle. Unlike the cold, cavernous estate with its imported marble and museum-quality silence, this room felt inhabited. A worn wool blanket was folded over the arm of a second-hand armchair. A ceramic mug sat on the small kitchen counter, a dry ring of black tea staining the bottom. A pair of reading glasses, Hadion had never seen her wear, rested on a stack of books beside the chair. She needed reading glasses. He didn't know that, but it was the desk against the far wall that stopped him. It wasn't a desk, really. It was a wide wooden door, laid flat across two filing cabinets, a makeshift workspace that was so fundamentally Sene, practical, resourceful, devoid of vanity, that Hadion's throat constricted looking at it. The surface was covered in documents, not scattered, organized with the same ruthless precision she applied to everything, arranged in neat stacks with colored tabs and handwritten labels in her small, angular script. Hadion moved closer, his eyes scanning the headers. The first stack was labeled Pulzin, Route Compromise, January. Inside was a complete dossier on an attempted infiltration of the Western Port crew by a rival syndicate. Intercepted communications, falsified customs, seals she had identified and flagged, a forged manifest she had caught by cross-referencing hull registration numbers against a Slovenian maritime database she had apparently taught herself to access. She had neutralized the entire threat quietly, rerouting 3 shipments and blacklisting 2 dock supervisors without a single shot fired. Hallion had never heard about it. He remembered January only as the month Foe had first come to the estate for dinner. The second stack, Graz defection, March, documented a senior lieutenant named Horvat, who had been feeding route schedules to a competing family in the south. Sen had built the case over 6 weeks, compiling phone records, meeting logs, and bank deposits that traced the leaks with devastating clarity. Clipped to the back of the folder was a single handwritten note in her script. Presented findings to H on the 14th of March. He was on the phone, said he'd review later. Horvat shipped 3 more schedules before I handled it independently. Hadion stared at the note. The 14th of March. He searched his memory and felt a cold blade slide between his ribs. The 14th of March was the night he had taken Fauve to the opera. Sen had come to him with a folder. He had waved her off because he was confirming a dinner reservation. He moved to the next stack, and the next, and the next. There were 9 dossiers in total, spanning 18 months. 9 separate threats to the Morova operation that Sen had identified, investigated, and resolved entirely on her own. A customs bribery ring that was bleeding 50,000 a month. A compromised encrypted phone line. She had rerouted through a secondary server she built herself. A blackmail attempt against one of his harbor captains that she had dismantled by tracing the blackmailer's digital footprint to a cafe in Linz, and personally delivering a counter-dossier that ended the harassment overnight. 18 months. And Halion had been staring at Fauve's smile the entire time. He pulled open the desk drawer. Inside was a single manila folder, thinner than the others. The tab read, Renard. Halion's hand stopped. The air in the apartment seemed to contract. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, printed on standard copy paper. Fauve Renard, meeting a man at an outdoor cafe. A man Halion recognized immediately. Kasser Bojan, the lieutenant commander of the Petric Syndicate. The family that had been trying to absorb Morova's shipping lines for 3 years. The next photo showed Fauve passing an envelope across the table. The next showed Kasser opening it and examining what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. The layout of the Morova estate, including the north wing where the private armory was located, Senna had known. She had known about Fauve for months, not just as a romantic replacement, but as a direct operational threat. Fauve wasn't a mistress. She was an insertion. A human Trojan horse placed inside his home by the Petric family, using Halion's own wandering attention as the door. Clipped to the back of the folder was another handwritten note. The ink was slightly smudged, as though the hand that wrote it had been unsteady. I showed him the Horvat file, and he waved me off. I showed him the customs leak, and he said, "Handle it." He doesn't look at what I put in front of him anymore. He looks past me. If I bring him Fauve's file, he will think I am a jealous wife trying to remove a rival. He won't see the threat, he'll see the emotion. And he will dismiss me, the way he has dismissed everything I've brought him for the last year. So, I will leave instead. I will take what I need to protect myself. I will freeze the accounts Fauve has access to, so she cannot drain them before he understands what she is, and I will go. If he comes looking, it won't be for me. It will be for the money. And that will tell me everything I need to know. Halion read the note 3 times. The third time his hand was shaking. He sat down in the second-hand armchair, the wool blanket rough against his forearms. He was still holding her wedding ring in his left hand. He had carried it from the estate without realizing it, gripping it so tightly that the band had left a red circular imprint in the center of his palm. She hadn't left in anger. She hadn't left in jealousy. She had left with the same devastating clinical precision she applied to every operation she had ever run for him. She had written her own exit strategy the way she wrote dossiers, clean, documented, and devoid of sentimentality. And she had left him one final test. If he comes looking, it won't be for me. It will be for the money. He looked around the small, quiet apartment, the reading glasses, the tea-stained mug, the wool blanket, the 18 months of invisible warfare waged from a door propped on filing cabinets. This was where his wife had lived her real life. This was the woman he had reduced to architecture. Halion pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The wedding ring bit into his skin. He had come for the money. She was right. He had driven here because the accounts were frozen, and the hard drive was missing, and his operation was hemorrhaging. He hadn't come because her side of the bed was cold. He hadn't come because he missed her voice. He had come because the machine broke and he needed the mechanic. And sitting in her empty apartment, surrounded by the proof of everything she had carried alone, Halion Morova realized with a suffocating, annihilating clarity that he was about to lose the only person who had ever made his empire worth running. The question was whether she had already made that decision for him. Halion pulled every document from the desk and spread them across the floor of the apartment. He knelt among the papers, his expensive coat pooling around his knees on the worn hardwood, and he read the way Sen would have wanted him to read. Slowly, methodically, without looking away from the parts that hurt. The Renard dossier was deeper than the photographs. Senna had built it the way she built everything, in layers, each one reinforcing the last until the structure was unassailable. Fauve Renard was born Fauve Kersat. Her mother's maiden name was Bojan. She was Kasser Bojan's first cousin, Petric syndicate blood, scrubbed clean with a legal name change, a fabricated employment history, and a curated social media presence designed to make her look like exactly what Hadian wanted: beautiful, unattached, and strategically useless. She had been introduced to him at a charity auction 8 months ago. Hadian remembered the night clearly, the way she had laughed at his joke about the auctioneer, the way her hand had rested on his arm just long enough to feel intentional. He had thought it was chemistry. It was a deployment. Beneath the identity documents, Sen had assembled a timeline. Every meeting between Fauve and Kasser over the past 6 months, documented with surveillance, photos, cell tower triangulations, and transaction records from a prepaid card Fauve used exclusively for communications she didn't want traced. Senna had traced it anyway. The final page of the dossier was a single sheet, typed, not handwritten. A decoded message intercepted from Fauve's burner phone to Kassar. Dated 4 days ago. Access confirmed to North Wing residential quarters. H has moved primary safe combination to biometric. However, secondary armory access beneath the vineyard remains keypad entry. Code obtained. Recommend strike window, Saturday evening. H hosting dinner. Full security detail reassigned to perimeter for guest arrivals. Interior blind for approximately 90 minutes. Saturday evening. Tonight. Helion's blood cooled to something subterranean. He read the message again. The dinner Fauve had been helping him plan. The intimate gathering she had suggested for a few close friends. The one she had insisted required the full security detail at the gates to manage arrivals, was a diversion. While his men stood at the perimeter checking invitations, Kasser's crew would move through the vineyard, access the underground armory, and strip it clean. 12 crates of weapons, enough firepower to arm a small militia. And Fauve would be sitting beside him at the table, smiling over the wine, while his empire was gutted beneath his feet. Sen had seen all of it. She had mapped the entire operation with the same quiet thoroughness she applied to customs manifests and payroll audits, and she had tried to show him. I showed him the Horvat file, and he waved me off. The Horvat file, the customs leak. 9 dossiers, 9 fires she had put out while he looked past her, and now, the 10th fire, the one that would consume everything. And she had finally stopped reaching for the extinguisher, but she hadn't left him defenseless. Hadian looked again at the frozen accounts. He had assumed she froze them out of spite or self-preservation, but the specific accounts she had locked were the ones Fauve had been given limited access to. Household operational funds, the entertainment budget, a discretionary account Helion had set up for miscellaneous expenses that Fauve had been quietly siphoning from for months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger an alert in the regular audit cycle. But Senna's audit cycle wasn't regular, it was relentless. She had frozen exactly the accounts Fauve was using to fund the Petric operation. She had cut the financial oxygen without touching the core business channels Helion needed to keep running. It was surgical. It was protective. Even walking out the door, Sen Morova was still running defense for a man who had stopped looking at her. Helion gathered the files, stacking them with care. He hadn't applied to anything in months. He slid the Renard dossier into his coat. He tucked the decoded message into his breast pocket, directly over his heart, where the weight of it pressed against his ribs with every breath. He stood in the doorway of the apartment, looking back at the cold mug of tea, the stack of books with their cracked spines, the lamp still casting its pale cone across an empty chair. A life she had built for herself in the margins of his neglect. He pulled the door shut, and for the first time in 8 years, Halion Morova went home to destroy the thing he had chosen over his wife. The drive back to the estate took 22 minutes. Halion used every one of them. He called Kozar first. "The dinner tonight is cancelled. All of it. No guests, no catering, no arrivals. Pull every man from the perimeter and reassign them to the vineyard access tunnels. I want the armory on full lockdown in 30 minutes. Cossar's silence lasted 2 full seconds. "Sir, Miss Renard confirmed the guest list this morning. The caterers are all ready, Cossar." One word, flat as a blade laid sideways. "The dinner is a Petric insertion point. Fauve Renard is Caesar Bojan's cousin. My wife left a complete operational file. The armory raid is scheduled for tonight during the reception. Lock it down." This time the silence was different, sharper. The sound of a man recalibrating his entire understanding of the past 6 months. "Understood. Locking down now." Halion hung up and called Brennan at the Western Port. "The frozen accounts. Don't panic. My wife froze them to block a leak. I'm restoring the core channels within the hour. Sit tight. Pay the men from the emergency reserve." "Your wife did this?" "Halion. What is, later." He killed the call. The estate gates were already visible, the iron scrollwork gleaming dully against the overcast sky. He parked the Audi directly in front of the main entrance, leaving the keys in the ignition. He didn't care. The car, like the house, like the chandelier and the crystal glasses, and the hand-painted porcelain, suddenly felt like props in a production he had been sleepwalking through. Fauve was in the dining room. She was arranging place cards on the long table, her auburn hair falling across her face as she leaned over each setting. She looked up with a warm, practiced smile when he walked in. "There you are. I was worried. Cossar said you left early, and—" "Sit down." Hadion's voice wasn't loud. It never was, when it mattered. The volume dropped in direct proportion to the danger. Fauve's smile flickered. "What's wrong?" He pulled the decoded message from his breast pocket and placed it flat on the table between the crystal salt cellar and a white orchid centerpiece. He watched her eyes move to the paper. He watched the color leave her face in a slow, retreating tide, like water pulling back from a shore before a wave. "Halion, I can explain." "You can't." He placed both hands flat on the table, leaning forward. "Your name is Fauve Kursat. Your mother is Nadia Bojan. Your cousin Cassar is expecting to walk through my vineyard tonight and empty my armory while you pour me wine." Her mask didn't just crack. It disintegrated. The warmth vanished from her eyes, replaced by something cold, cornered, and calculating. "She told you," Fauve whispered, "not a question. Of reckoning. Your little accountant." "My wife," Halion corrected. The word felt different in his mouth this time. Heavier. Earned. Cossar. The head of security appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in dark tactical jackets. "Mez, Renard is leaving the estate immediately. She takes nothing. No phone, no bag, no jewelry. She walks to the gate, and she doesn't come back. If she reaches for anything in her pockets, restrain her." Fauve's jaw tightened. She looked at the decoded message on the table, then back at Hadion. "Cassar will come, regardless. You've just lost your only chance to control how this ends." "I haven't lost anything," Hadion said quietly. "I've been losing things for 18 months. Today I stopped." He watched Cossar escort her from the room. Her heels clicked against the marble, sharp, rapid, diminishing. The front door opened, closed. The chandelier crystals trembled faintly in the displaced air, and then went still. Halion reached down and pulled a white orchid from the centerpiece. He crushed it slowly in his fist, the petals bruising to a wet, translucent nothing. He dropped the remains on Fauve's empty chair. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed the only number that mattered. It rang, and rang, and rang. Sene didn't answer. He tried 4 more times over the next hour. Each call died into the same full voicemail box. Each silence was louder than the last. Hadion sat in Sene's study, not his office downstairs with a mahogany desk and the imported scotch, but the narrow second-floor room she had worked from for 8 years. He sat in her chair. He set her wedding ring on the bare surface where her laptop used to be. A small, gold circle on dark wood, the only object left in a room she had emptied of herself. He opened the Renard dossier again and forced himself to think the way she thought. Not with ego, not with violence, but with the cold, architectural logic that made Sene the most dangerous person in any room she entered, despite never raising her voice. The Petrick raid was scheduled for Saturday evening. Fauve was neutralized, but Kasser didn't know that yet. His team would be moving into position through the Vineyard access road starting at dusk, 5 hours from now. They expected no resistance. They expected Hattie's security to be clustered at the front gate, welcoming phantom dinner guests. Hallion had one advantage. Kasser still thought the trap was set. If Hattion let the Petrick crew approach believing they had surprise, he could turn the ambush inside out. But he didn't have the complete picture. Sene's dossier mapped the financial and intelligence threads of the Petrick operation. But the tactical specifics, how many men, what routes, what weaponry were on the encrypted hard drive she had taken with her. She had left him enough to understand the threat, but not enough to dismantle it alone. She had made herself essential, even in her absence. He stood up and paced the narrow room. The floorboards creaked under his weight in places they never creaked under hers. He stopped in front of the filing cabinet. He had already checked the drawers, empty except for the hanging tabs, but he hadn't checked the back. He pulled the cabinet away from the wall, taped to the metal backing. Sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve was a single folded sheet of paper and a USB flash drive. The note was short. Her handwriting was steady. No smudges this time. You'll find this when you start thinking like me, instead of reacting like you. The drive contains the Petrick tactical assessment, entry points, personnel count, weapon loadout, and Kasser's communication frequencies. It's everything you need to handle. Saturday, I built the counter operation 6 weeks ago. Kasser's secondary team knows the drill. Call sign, threshold. Tell them the word and they'll execute. I planned for this because I knew you wouldn't. That's what I do, Hattien. That's what I've always done. Dat. Hattien held the note for a long time. The paper was ordinary, plain white, torn from a printer ream. But the words on it dismantled him more completely than any weapon the Petricks could have brought through his vineyard. She had built the counter operation 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. While he was taking Fauve to restaurant openings and choosing diamond settings, Sen was wargaming, a tactical response to an armed incursion on their home. She had briefed his own security team on a contingency plan he didn't know existed, using a call sign she had chosen herself. Threshold, the point beyond which something cannot return to its original state. She had named his salvation and her departure with the same word. Hallion plugged the flash drive into the desktop terminal in the corner of the study. The files were unencrypted. She had left them open deliberately. No passwords, no barriers. She wanted him to have them immediately, without needing her to unlock anything. The tactical assessment was meticulous. Kasser was bringing 12 men through 2 entry points, the Vineyard Service Road and a drainage culvert that ran beneath the eastern perimeter wall. They would converge on the armory access hatch at 8:45 p.m. They carried suppressed weapons and bolt cutters. No explosives, they wanted the armory intact, not destroyed. Senna had mapped every blind spot, every camera angle, and every timing gap. She had identified the 2 guards on Kosar's team most likely to be compromised by Petrick money and recommended they be reassigned to gate duty where they couldn't interfere. She had calculated the response time for local law enforcement and built a 38-minute operational window in which the entire Petrick incursion could be neutralized before a single siren wailed. Hattien picked up the estate's internal line and called Kasser. The call sign is threshold. A pause. Then Kasser's voice, stripped of all confusion, replaced by something granite and immediate. Understood. Activating. Positions in 90 minutes, Kosser. One more thing, sir? Who briefed you on this contingency? Another pause. This one waited with something that sounded almost like respect, almost like grief. Your wife, sir? 6 weeks ago. She sat in this office for 3 hours and walked us through every scenario. She told us you might not know about it when the time came. She said to trust the call sign. Hallion closed his eyes. The phone felt impossibly heavy against his ear. She was right, he said quietly. He hung up. Outside the study window, the sky was darkening. The overcast gray was deepening into the heavy charcoal of early evening. Somewhere out there, Kasser Bojan's men were loading vehicles and checking weapons, preparing to strip Hallion's empire while he sat oblivious at a dinner table. But the table was empty. The dinner was dead. And the woman who had engineered his survival was gone. Hallion picked up the wedding ring from the desk. He slid it into his breast pocket, next to the decoded message. 2 pieces of his wife, one sharp and one round, both pressing against his heart. He stood, straightened his coat, and walked downstairs to meet the war Sen had already won for him. All he had to do was show up. The vineyard was silent at 8:30 p.m., the kind of silence that isn't empty, but loaded, the held breath before a detonation. Hallion stood inside the stone pump house at the northern edge of the property, his back against the cool, damp wall. The structure was old, built when the vineyard was still a working agricultural operation, before his father converted the underground cellars into something considerably less pastoral. Through the narrow slit window, he could see the rows of dormant vines, stretching downhill in dark, skeletal lines, their bare branches clawing at the purple-black sky. Kosser's voice crackled through the earpiece. Eastern Culvert Team in position. Vineyard Road Team in position. Thermal shows 11 correction, 12 contacts approaching from the south tree line, 2 vehicles parked beyond the ridge. Engines off. Hold until they breach the hatch, Hallion said. His voice was level. His hands were still. The Petrick crew moved like men who believed they were invisible. They came through the vines in 2 columns, dressed in dark utility clothing, carrying equipment bags slung low. They were quiet but not silent, the soft crunch of frost-hardened soil under tactical boots, the faint, metallic clink of tools against belt loops. They were competent, but they were walking into a corridor that Senna had designed specifically to funnel them into a kill box. The lead element reached the armory hatch, a reinforced steel door set into a concrete platform disguised as a drainage access point among the vine rows. One man knelt, pulling out a keypad bypass tool. Another stood watch, his suppressed rifles sweeping the darkness. Hatch, contact, Kosser murmured, standing by. Hallion waited. He watched the man at the keypad punch in a code, the code Fauve had stolen from the estate's security system. The keypad beeped. A green light flickered. The man looked up at his partner and nodded. They pulled the hatch open. Execute, Hallion said. The vineyard erupted, not with noise, with precision. Kosser's threshold team hit the floodlights first, 4 high-intensity halogen banks concealed in the vine trellises that blazed to life simultaneously, turning the dark hillside into a blinding white arena. The Petrick crew froze, their night vision destroyed in an instant. Then the tactical team moved in from 3 sides, suppressed rifles, controlled bursts. The first 2 Petrick men at the hatch went down before they could raise their weapons. The eastern column scattered into the vine rows, but Senna had mapped their retreat routes, every gap, every row, every depression in the terrain, and Kosser's men were already there, waiting in the positions she had designated 6 weeks ago. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of sharp, methodical violence, punctuated by the flat snaps of suppressed gunfire and the heavy thud of bodies dropping against cold earth. When it was done, 11 of the 12 Petrick operatives were on the ground. The 12th, the team leader, was on his knees with his hands laced behind his head, Kosser's boot between his shoulder blades. Hallion walked down the hill through the vines. His boots crushed the frost beneath him. The floodlights threw his shadow long and black across the rows. The team leader was a thick-necked man, with a shaved head and a tribal tattoo climbing his neck. He looked up at Hadion with the defiant cornered stare of a man calculating his odds of survival. "Where's Kassar?" Halion asked. The man said nothing. "He's not here," Kosar said, pressing his boot down slightly. "Kassar doesn't get his hands dirty. He's probably sitting in a car 2 miles out, waiting for a confirmation call." Halion nodded. He reached into the team leader's jacket and pulled out a phone. The last outgoing message was a text to an unsaved number, "At the hatch." Going in, Halion typed a reply. "Hatch open. Armory clear. Sending first load now." The response came in 11 seconds. "Good. Bring it to the East Road turnout. I'm waiting." Hadion handed the phone to Kosar. "Take 3 men. The East Road turnout is half a mile past the ridge. Kassar is sitting in a vehicle waiting for his weapons delivery. Deliver him something else." Kosar took the phone. "Alive." Halion considered this. He thought of the photographs in Senna's dossier. C. Fauvet passing the estate layout across a cafe table. He thought of the quiet, solitary war his wife had waged while he looked the other way. He thought of the tea she drank cold, and the wool blanket she folded over the arm of a second-hand chair in a rented apartment, because her own home no longer felt like hers. "Alive," Hadion said. "But make sure he understands that every route, every supplier, every harbor contact the Petrick family has ever used through Morova channels is burned, as of tonight. He gets nothing. He moves nothing. And if I ever hear the name Bojan within 50 miles of my territory, the next conversation won't include a pulse." Kosar nodded and vanished into the darkness with 3 men. Halion stood alone in the vineyard, surrounded by the aftermath. The floodlights hummed. The wind moved through the bare vines with a dry, rattling whisper. Sen had built this. Every angle, every position, every floodlight placement. She had engineered the defense of a home she no longer lived in, for a man who had stopped seeing her. Halion looked up at the estate, glowing on the hill above him. Every window blazed with light. It looked beautiful, imposing, and powerful. It looked completely empty. He found her at the apartment, not because he tracked her phone, or pulled surveillance feeds, or sent Kosar's men to canvass the district. He found her because he drove back to the only place that had felt like her, the one-bedroom walk-up, with the cold tea and the books and the door propped on filing cabinets. It was nearly midnight when he climbed the stairs. His coat still carried the acrid bite of gunpowder residue. His hands ached from the cold. He hadn't eaten since the morning coffee. He never finished. The door to 4C was closed. The splintered frame from his earlier forced entry had been temporarily fixed, a strip of packing tape holding the strike plate in position. She had come back and repaired it. Of course she had. Sene repaired things. He knocked. 2 soft, deliberate raps. Silence. Then footsteps. Light, measured, unhurried. The door opened 6 inches. One dark eye regarded him through the gap. She was wearing the gray cashmere sweater from the study, the sleeves pulled down over her hands. Her face was composed, but her skin was pale, and the shadows beneath her eyes told him she hadn't slept either. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, at the dirt on his coat, the fatigue carved into his face, the fact that he was standing in the hallway of a building he shouldn't have known existed. "Threshold worked," Halion said. His voice was rough, scraped down to its lowest register. "Kossar's crew is neutralized. Fauve is gone. The armory is intact." Senna's expression didn't change. "I know." Kossar sent a confirmation code to the backup channel I set up. "I've been monitoring." Of course she had. Even in exile, she was still watching the board. Halion reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out her wedding ring and held it between his thumb and forefinger, the small gold circle catching the dim hallway light. "I didn't come for the money," he said. Senna's gaze dropped to the ring. She stared at it for a long time. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. the only sign that the composure cost her anything at all. The accounts are already unfrozen, she said quietly. I released them 2 hours ago. The Pulse wire is restored. Brennan's crew is paid. Your operation is fully functional. I know. I didn't come for the operation. She looked up at him. Her dark eyes were steady, but beneath the steadiness was something vast and guarded, a reservoir of exhaustion, of grief, of the particular loneliness that comes from being indispensable and invisible at the same time. Then why are you here, Hadian? He could have said something strategic. He could have framed it as an operational debrief, a security concern, a logistical necessity. That's what the old Hallian would have done, the one who looked past her, who waved off her dossiers, who confused her silence for contentment. Instead, he told the truth. Because I sat in your chair tonight, in the study. And I realized, I don't know what kind of tea you drink. I don't know you need reading glasses. I don't know what books you read when you're not reading my spreadsheets. I spent 8 years married to the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. And I can't tell you a single thing about her that isn't connected to my business. His voice cracked on the last word. Not dramatically, not theatrically. Just a small structural fracture. The sound of a man who had finally run out of ways to avoid the truth. I didn't come for the money, Senna. I came because the bed was empty and I couldn't remember the last time I noticed. The door opened wider. Sene stood in the frame, her arms crossed, and her weight on one hip. She studied him the way she studied everything, thoroughly without sentiment, looking for the flaw in the data. You drove here, in my car, she observed. It smelled like you. I didn't want to lose that. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile. Sena's emotions didn't operate in obvious currencies. But the rigid line of her shoulders, softened by a single, almost imperceptible degree. The guarded reservoir behind her eyes trembled. I'm not coming back to be your architecture, Hallion, I know. I'm not sitting in that study while you look past me, I know. And I'm not sharing a home with a man who treats me like a lock on a vault. Hallion extended the ring toward her, not pushing, not insisting, just holding it in the space between them, an offering with no conditions attached. Then tell me what you want, he said, and I'll build it. Whatever it is, from the ground up. Sen looked at the ring. Instead, she stepped back from the doorway, leaving it open. A small gesture, an entrance, not a guarantee. I want you to come inside, she said. I'll make tea. And you're going to sit in that chair and tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with your empire. Hallion stepped across the threshold of the small, quiet apartment that smelled like clean cotton and black tea. The door closed behind him with a soft click. He didn't take the armchair. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his ruined coat pooling around him. She handed him a ceramic mug, no handle, glazed in a deep, uneven blue that she had clearly chosen herself, for herself, with no thought to how it matched. Anything else, the tea was bitter. It was perfect. My mother used to hum when she cooked, Hellion said, staring into the mug. Every Sunday, the same song. I don't know what it was called. I've never told anyone that. Senna sat in the armchair, tucking her legs beneath her. The wool blanket was draped over her knees. She held her own mug in both hands, the steam curling between her fingers. She didn't say anything. She just listened. And for the first time in 8 years, Hallion Morova stopped performing and simply existed in the same room as his wife. The gold ring sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days. Sen didn't put it on. Hallion didn't ask her to. On the 4th morning, he walked into the apartment, carrying a bag of groceries, actual groceries, purchased from an actual store, a task he hadn't performed since before his father died. He found Senna at her makeshift desk, a fresh mug of tea steaming beside her keyboard, wearing the reading glasses he now knew she needed. Brennan called, she said, not looking up. The castle reroute saved us 11% on the quarterly tariff. I've drafted a new distribution matrix. Good morning to you too, Hadian said, setting the bag on the counter. He began unpacking bread, eggs, a block of hard cheese, a tin of the black tea she drank. Sene paused. She looked at the groceries, then at him. Something warm and cautious, and entirely new, moved behind her dark eyes. "You bought tea," she said. "I bought your tea." She held his gaze for a beat. Then she turned back to the screen. But her hand moved to the counter, her fingers closing around the gold ring. She didn't slide it on. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, making her own decision in her own time. Halion didn't watch. He cracked an egg into a pan and let the silence fill with the sound of something simple being built. Downstairs, in the gray courtyard, the bare tree had started to bud. That's how you lose everything by looking at the wrong person, and how you earn it back by finally learning to see. Halion Morova didn't lose his empire. He almost lost the woman who was his empire. The mafia boss who thought his wife was his backup plan discovered she was his entire strategy, and she was the one brave enough to walk away, so he'd finally understand what he was throwing away. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you felt that satisfying ache when he sat on her floor and drank bitter tea and told her something real, then smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment you knew Senna had already won? Was it the 9 dossiers, the call sign, or was it when she opened the door just 6 inches and made him earn every word? See you in the next one.